Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this lovely second live stream. I'm once again joined by Mods2. Say hello.
Hello, it's great to see you all.
There we go. Sort of. Hold on, you have to
Well, I mean, I
elaborate.
can't literally see anybody, but you know, it's great to be doing another one of these.
Okay, it was like how there's some grudges towards the players here, but I'm glad there aren't. Thank you for joining. Just the quick heads up again. Twitch Prime, it's still there. 14 days of free membership. You can claim that now, and make sure you use the sub on someone else. Oh, our producer wasn't ready to get the clip up. But that's fine. There we go. There it is. That's pretty cool. Get it. And then without further ado, let's get into the tutorials, I would say. I saw you came up with that pun, and I'm absolutely loving it. So thank you for creating that one as well.
Thank you.
Take it away, Stu.
Yeah, when I was putting the slides together for that, it occurred to me when I needed some kind of a short catchphrase for it, and I thought, why have I not thought of this sooner? It's brilliant. Anyway, so yes, tutorials is what I was planning to continue this calling this series. So the previous tutorial, we went over the tutorial in Classic Tutorial Island, in a step-by-step through all the stages of that, and talking about the user experience of that. This time around, since the current tutorial that we have live for Tutorial Island for our initial primer is a remake of Tutorial Island from the second generation. So I thought I'd take the two of them and contrast them and see how they differ. So that's basically the structure for this one.
Can I interject quickly? There are a lot of people saying that they did not get the LootScape for last week's stream.
Oh.
I just double checked that is indeed the case. I think one of us forgot to press a button, so we will be doing that. And of course, you will also get your LootScape for this stream if you watch it. That's it, Stu. Take it away.
Okay, so just to summarize the disclaimers, similar to last time, this is going to be a developer discussion of a very niche topic of tutorials. I tend to get very absurdly focused on very trivial details. That's just how I roll. That's not going to be to everyone's taste, so if you enjoyed the previous one, it's going to be more of the same. If you're coming here looking for exciting reveals of future content, this isn't the place for it, I'm afraid. But if you're just here for your LootScape, that's great. Feel free to join us. So I'm just going to go through the slides and chat over certain things in them, and then endeavor to actually take a breath every few slides or so. Luke is checking the chat. I can't see the chat. And hopefully you guys might have some questions along the way for us. We'll also have a bit of a Q&A at the end with any time that's left over within the hour for any further questions you might have. So
please put your questions in the chat as well if they come up.
Great. So first of all, we have character creation. So in the original old school, we had the character creation taking place in world rather than being something that happened before you enter Tutorial Island. The old school form also presents all of the customization options to you all on one screen all at once. This has the advantage that you're not switching between different tabs, and you can holistically see all the changes on your character all at once. The drawback from a cognitive load standpoint, and that's a term I'm going to be using a lot, you might get tired of me saying it. Basically, cognitive load is when there's a lot of stuff going on screen all at once, and it can feel a bit overwhelming. You're not really sure where your eye should be drawn to. So the old school version gives you a lot of convenience, but it can also be a lot to take in all at once. So the newer form takes a more of a stage process where we start with broader features like your gender, and then we go down through several tabs to more specific features. That's about it for that one. And then we get into when you actually arrive in Tutorial Island itself. Now, in the old school one, I've got a question for you. Which character do you think you're playing in that screenshot? The answer is you're actually the guy in the orange shirt behind the guy who's in the foreground. And that's kind of the drawback of having multiple players all in the same starting area. Even as you start out, you're not even sure, well, who even am I on this screen? It's another aspect of cognitive load of trying to just discern the relation between this character you just created and who you're playing. So for the newer one, we opted to go for an instanced environment, so there isn't as much going on. It's a little bit more of a controlled environment. We know what entities are around that you might interact with. The old school one also, it basically had two mediums of communication, either talking...
Uh-oh. We've lost them, let's do briefly. Oh boy. All right. Give it a second. I imagine Mods 2 will pop in. Are you back, Mods 2?
Okay. Yeah. Yep.
There we go.
Yes. I hear that my provider is a bit unreliable. I think I use the same one as Mod Freezy, so we were lucky last time. Hopefully, we'll continue to be lucky this time around. What was I? Okay, so I'm going to repeat what I said, and hopefully, I'm not repeating myself too much. So old school's tutorial mechanisms were that they could either convey information through conversation, through talking to an NPC, or through this message box at the bottom of the screen. Consequently, that message box tended to get quite verbose. As you can see, it's got quite a few sentences there trying to portray to you all the different things you're doing. The newer form, we use more contextual pop-ups, just conveying certain things and trying to include a bit of iconography in there as well. Something that can be a bit of a struggle to people coming into RuneScape is that it has a quite unconventional control scheme. In principle, it's nice and simple. Everything you just point and click, but you also got to deal with manual rotation of your camera, zooming that camera, and the keyboard controls for that is to use your WASD keys or the arrow keys. And often people come in expecting to be able to move with those keys. So first thing up, we try to make you aware of what those keys do in this context. Also, the newer one, I took a trick from Ashdale here, where it starts in closely zoomed in on your character, and the thing that you're supposed to interact with is currently outside of your field of view. That way, it encourages you to learn by doing, because you effectively have to rotate the camera in order to see, as you can see in the little pop-up window down there, the thing you need to interact with. So that way, they can hopefully. Well, either they figure out how to rotate their camera or they can't progress. Fortunately, in terms of the data that we get through, there is very little drop off here, so it seems to be quite successful. Is there any questions from the chat so far, Luke?
I've got two of them. Are you able to explain a little bit about what cognitive load is first and why it's bad to have too much cognitive load?
I did mention that earlier, so it might have come through just before that stage. But basically, if there's a lot of information on the screen all at one time, you don't know where to focus your attention, and it can feel quite overwhelming. An example is that there's this card reader at a card park near here, which is just it's a sea of flashing lights and all these sorts of things on that machine that's drawing my attention, and I don't really know what I'm supposed to be focusing on right now in order to go through the process of putting my ticket in there and paying for it. So trying to minimize the amount of stuff on the screen to things that you need to deal with at the moment, and then providing it at a stage in that flow when it becomes more relevant to you.
So is it too much cognitive load also creates too friction, right? Kind of often, or confusion, which in turn creates friction and in turn creates frustration, and then you might stop playing as well, right?
Yeah, exactly. You want to try and make the user experience as smooth as possible. If there's, as say, friction, if there's things there where the player doesn't know what to do, they're less inclined to continue playing. When RuneScape was created, there weren't as many games on the market. People were generally more resilient. You might, buy one game and you might just play that one game exhaustively to completion because you didn't really have anything else. But now that it's such a saturated market that we have to be a lot more mindful of tolerance. Particularly, we've also found mobile users tend to be a lot less resilient. So, like our retention drop-off is slightly lower on mobile, going through Tutorial Island specifically, than desktop, where people are a lot more resilient.
That's actually really interesting. I did not know that. But I can't imagine it being the case because there are just so many mobile games out there, and they tend to have very smooth processes as well. The second question I had for you, and that was about about the character creation.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts on, for example, adding like a look randomizer, because currently it doesn't exist?
A look randomizer, in the sense of having like a randomized button and it alternates between appearances.
It switches up your head and the colors and all those things.
Okay, well, I mean, the new one on the right does have a randomized button down the bottom, but which literally does just pick randomly from the different sets that are available.
Okay.
yeah, in the old school form, yeah, it defaults to your familiar chap with the goatee and the bald head. And then for expedience sake, some people might just do that by default, which is why there tends to be a leaning towards one particular appearance. But yeah, that feature's there.
Cool.
Going into a bit more detail then about these pop-ups. Now, like I said, I can be a bit critical of my own work here, and this was one that I kind of put together quite quickly because, in fact, implementing Tutorial Island was something that was basically done within the scope of an A/B test when I was on the Ninja team. So it was something I had to do myself and Mod Doctor had to turn around in a very rapid period of time. So did the best I could with the time I had, but this is something I would like to finesse in the future. The trouble is that the player there is an issue of cognitive load here. We're covering rotating your camera and zooming your camera all at once. That is quite a lot to take in at one time. So what I've done, if the player skips Tutorial Island, we have a different onboarding process when you arrive in Berthorpe, which is a bit more streamlined. So it goes through and handles rotation as one action, zoom as another action, and then interaction with something in the world as another one. So it's a bit more of a steady process. If I was to go back to Tutorial Island, I'd be inclined to do the same sort of thing here, and consequently also dynamically switch between the objective on that activity tracker too, so you're not reading as much text all at once. This is also a quite nice feature that the old school team did for their one, which I'd be quite inclined to steal. So they have a dedicated space on their interface where they cycle through those basic control features. I think it ends around about the time that you leave the guide's house. It does fade away after a while, but that's another way that you can handle that, break it down to small sections. If the player has essentially forgotten, then there's another persistent way of displaying that, so that they have something to fall back on if they do find they're struggling with the controls, because it can be a tricky one. Then we get on to your first conversation. There's a little thing on the new one to indicate what button you need to push to progress. I recently made that so that's a context-sensitive feature. So if you were to skip Tutorial Island, the very first NPC that you speak to will have that. That way, it is onboarded regardless of what your first conversation might be. And then just to compare the two, it winds up being quite wordy, the older version. It tries to pack a lot of information into that initial conversation. I tried to boil it down to something more simple. Even going into things like the knowledge base, which this was an old video that I referred to, by the way, so some of that stuff will be redundant information. Personally, I'd be very keen to try and emphasize the wiki a lot more, do more wiki integration features, because the way I see it, that's a key part of the player's user flow anyway. There's so much of the game just isn't available in game. People get accustomed to that, so you might as well teach that user flow. The tricky part, of course, is there with mobile coming out of your client, going into a browser page and coming back can be quite a tricky flow. So ideally, that would be through some kind of embedded browser that's displayed that wiki. So that will be a feature that will be a long time coming, but I'd certainly like to move more in that direction. Any questions, Luke?
Not really from chat. There are a lot of questions about other things that are not tutorial related. That's not something we will be going into detail about today. That is probably best saved for a stream on Tuesday, so I would suggest you ask those questions then. Aside from that, I just full-heartedly agree on the wiki stuff. I feel like it is an official part of playing RuneScape almost. Like if you're not using the wiki, it's just 10 times harder. So
consequently, I think it's a skill that I think we fundamentally need to teach. If it's just a critical part of your gameplay. But I'd like to look into that in the future. So you might have recalled from the classic Tutorial Island that there was a controls guide. So the older form emphasizes your options menu and the controls that are available to you. I opted to not include that in the newer one, just to focus on your world interactions, and because frankly our options menu is just so terribly complicated. If I started explaining it, we would be here all day. So it's something to defer until later. Just focusing in on a few parts of the user interface at this stage. So old school tutorial uses just two dedicated parts of your interface. Your minimap is always present, and there's these stone buttons that get added to your interface gradually over the course of the tutorial as those features get introduced. So we just cover the options menu, so that one appears down there. The newer one, in a similar sort of fashion, as I mentioned last time, it requires some pretty nasty hacks in order to achieve it, but we have a duplicated version of our ribbon that gradually adds those components to it as you progress through the tutorial in a similar sort of way. We do unfortunately also have the action bar, because that turned out to be a very difficult thing to get rid of, but I've at least minimized that to try and reduce some of the cognitive load. I also opted to not include the minimap at this stage because the player is in a confined room at this point. And they wouldn't really need to see that context until they leave that room. So it's just there's one less distraction on screen to deal with, and they can focus on what's in world. Then another thing, the progress bar that Tutorial Island has. This is something that I was quite fond of. That unfortunately it's quite a long experience. It takes about 20 minutes to play through Tutorial Island. So having something on your screen that lets you know when this will finally be over is, I think, helpful. When I recreated Tutorial Island, I did the version that's in the middle there. Also an opportunity to put a objective front and center, nicely succinct, into that as well. Basically the equivalent of that message box that's on the old version. But trying to keep it short and sweet, use highlighting, just to make it very clear, here's what you need to do, and use pop-ups for the additional information if that is required. Looks like I timed it slightly wrong when I had saved it, but also it shows that which of your button is being clicked by this little gold highlight, and then there's animation there as well to just try help indicate the interaction you need to do. And then when we moved over to the new path system, I needed to convert this tutorial to use that as a path, so then has the activity tracker in there as a way of portraying that information, so that all becomes embedded in that one system, which unfortunately means we lost that progress bar. I'm hoping to try to bring that back someday. I think that is a lot more visual. Yes, what was I talking about here? Any questions?
I've written down 3 of them. A lot of people are asking my name as well. I'm Poerkie. I've been community manager for about 2 years, so I'm glad you still don't recall my name. It's great.
Feel the love.
A lot of people are very happy with what you're talking about. And someone was actually, Tommy Zimmer was actually curious if there is a reason why dungeoneering and crafting are not part of Tutorial Island. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so that's an interesting issue. Basically, a tutorial gets implemented at a certain time, like I believe Tutorial Island was 2004. And so at the time, it covered whatever was part of the game at the time. And then this is a game that gets added to on a very regular basis. So as new features get added in, you have to ask the question of, well, do we put the stuff into the tutorial, or do we leave it as something for the player to be taught later on? Later tutorials tended to lean towards being more comprehensive. So like the Learning the Ropes tutorial that came after this one was updated to include a lot of the new features that have been brought out since, but then they're just meant for an even longer tutorial and a long period of time before the player actually gets into the game and starts getting to engage with the wider world. So you've got to try and find that balance between teaching the stuff the player really needs to know right now, and I'd argue that the current Tutorial Island does teach several things that aren't really crucial for core gameplay, like the prayer skill. You can teach the sorts of things when you actually arrive at that place. In the example of dungeoneering, rather than trying to artificially create some kind of simulacrum of dungeoneering within this Tutorial Island environment, it would be better to help give the player some means of being aware that dungeoneering exists, like through some kind of a path that they can opt into that guides them there, and then tutorializes the flow of, well, how you get into dungeoneering and how you make a group, and then dungeoneering itself has embedded tutorials as you step through it. It's a rigged version of that first map that's simplified to try and teach you the core mechanics. So it's something that it's generally preferable to do more of a kind of a staged process than too much of an upfront process, because the player may not have any interest in crafting or dungeoneering.
Yeah, No, fully understandable. I kind of imagine it's the same with archaeology, right? And that skill has a tutorial when you reach that zone as well.
Yeah.
So that's quite nice. Currently, this is Mumphy who says the wiki command, so exclamation mark wiki in chat. So if you don't know
Yeah.
that, make sure you do that as well. Or is it slash? It's actually slash. My
Yeah.
fault. Slash wiki.
Yeah.
It's currently kind of like an Easter egg in game. There's not a lot of bits that point towards it. Could we potentially showcase that in a menu then? Would that be a good solution?
Personally, I'd be keen on that. Yeah, I think that's something that old school improves over S4, that they have a dedicated button for it. We've talked before about essentially having a wiki spell that you can use to target entities, and that would trigger that link. Different ways that we could do it. Yeah, certainly I would like us to do more of that sort of thing. That is more within the space of the user interface overall, and that top level experience, rather than specifically tutorialization. So it's not something that I would specifically do. It's not really my area of expertise. But yeah, it's certainly. We certainly want to bring wiki front and center. We just have to bear in mind what's the best approach to take for all of our platforms, and that also isn't going to contribute even further cognitive load.
I actually quite like that. It would be pretty cool to have like a spell of wisdom or something, and then you use it and you get brought to the wiki because you learn more about it or something. But that's just
Yeah,
like
I was thinking like an
thematically
identifier or
pretty
research
cool.
spell. Yeah.
Yeah, that's quite nice. The last question. So currently we've got the path system in RuneScape. What are plans to add more final gore orientated paths? Is that something we'd ever want to do? For example, unlock Prif or get a Sun Spear? Unlock Convention?
Yeah. So some of those already exist. There is a path to Prifdinus and a few other key features like unlocking ancient curses, getting used to God War's dungeon, a few things like that. That's definitely the area I would like to focus on next. So as I mentioned last time, my current priority is helping out with improvements to the backend data structure for our achievement system. That is facilitating us being able to do more with paths in the future. So yes, that's definitely something I'm planning to work on long term. As I say, got to build the toolbox to get us there first, because our current path system has quite a lot of limitations. Some of those are because we opted to emphasize the activity tracker as a way to give guidance to the player to make the mobile experience much more streamlined. The drawback to that is that in terms of actually accessing more complex paths or giving the player more options, that whole interface interaction needs refinement. Currently, we don't tutorialize that. It's very hidden away on a secondary interface. That interface isn't really fit for purpose. So we're wanting to do some more investment there. But that's going to be the next stage after that, is looking into laying that framework.
Cool. All right, that's it for me again for this bit. So feel free to continue.
Okay. So yes. So the trying to remember what I was talking about on the previous slide. Oh, the previous slide was basically just saying that we had split the goal of opening the door and going to the survival expert into just distinct objectives, while the older version gave you that information, both of those objectives at once. So just to so you have a clear understanding of what's the next thing you need to do, rather than having too much information. And then moving on, again, it winds up being quite wordy here in the older version. In the newer one, we tried to keep it much more streamlined, just have the visual guidance to where you need to go, very clear objective of this is who you need to speak to. And we've covered the camera control earlier on, so we don't need to include it here. So one way that we differed is that I emphasized the skills panel earlier on. The older version is actually out of order here. It's normally in the older tutorial we start teaching chopping down trees and so forth, and gaining a level before we then see the skills menu. I want to try and emphasize the skills earlier on, because skilling is such a crucial part of RuneScape, understanding that you have these numbers that go up, and then we can cover the once you know the initial state, then we can see the difference is made later when you've gained those levels and you've seen that feedback and giving you an idea of the wealth of different options available to you here. No problem. Yeah, so this one's fairly similar. We don't have to worry about giving you certain tools because it's all automatically on the tool belt, so that simplifies this flow. You just have to do the thing, but you have less going on around you. So, and also you also have to make your own fire because you may not necessarily be able to use somebody else's. So it just helps to control what you're learning. This is pretty similar, and I think something that's important to emphasize in RuneScape is that it's quite a sit back and wait sort of game. You do an interaction, your character does the work for you. So I feel that's an important thing to put across. We've had issues where new people come in, they keep trying to click the tree to chop faster and things like that. And you might have seen that message of you can only click once on fishing spots and things. That was due to that, to try to give that feedback that no, unfortunately, it's not going to go any faster than this. You're just going to have to let it flow. Any questions from the chat, Luke?
No questions from the chat for you specifically, but I want to address two things quickly. Dudu Shuk asked or mentioned that there are some performance issues if you enter certain cities and those kinds of things. It's something we're aware of. We've actually found a problem already. It was introduced since yesterday. And we are currently working on a fix for those, so hopefully that will get resolved very soon. It is related with our engine, so it requires an engine update, so it will take a little bit of time, but it should hopefully be resolved soon. And then secondly, Cow Scrimsy was commenting on the fact that I was bouncing, and that might be because I have a little bit of music in the background, but I'll try and sit still.
I'll try to speak to the beat and get a bit of a rhythm going.
I appreciate that.
So next up, we see something else that we do in the more modern tutorial is highlighting things in your interface rather than using text to try and make you aware of them. So do a bit more visual learning. Means less text on the screen, more, okay, I just need to interact with that thing that's highlighted and has a bit of glow on it to draw your eye, that sort of thing. Why did I write this one down? I think I was basically just comparing the two. I don't think there's much that differs. Oh, other than the survival expert happens to mention why eating food is, why you're even doing this. What's the purpose of having food? Don't have to worry about being given a net. We can just go straight ahead and do the interaction. And good old burning the shrimp happens in both cases. Although I think that Old School has recently skipped over this section because like ourselves, we found that there is a slight drop in engagement around this point. People can get a bit frustrated at this stage. So I'm hoping we can do the same ourselves soon. As I mentioned last time, if we make any changes, we do them in A/B tests so that we can compare if it is actually making an improvement or not. Even if it's something that, in this case, was proven in Old School, we still want to do the A/B test just to verify that we're not, due to some particular quirk, making things worse by making a change in our tutorial. Yes, but we at least reinforced on the newer version that even though you burnt the thing, it's not your fault. This always happens to everyone the first time, just to try to alleviate that feeling of you failed. I mean, at least letting you know that it was rigged that way, just to try and soften the blow a little bit. Yeah, emphasizing the food, going on to the next section and splitting that up into 2 pages, so there's not telling about those two things simultaneously.
I'm going to ask you, Stu, what's your thought on the burning shrimp in general? Because I feel like it is it's all not a contentious topic, but there's always a lot of different opinions around the burning shrimp, whether we should burn the first shrimp or not in the first place.
Yeah, exactly. It is iconic. It's part of your childhood memories of RuneScape. You know, that's of going through all that effort to do this thing and then immediately failing. And I think for a lot of people feeling that they personally failed, that they got a bad roll, or just the RNG has started off sucking. It's going to stay that way henceforth. So yeah, that is a tricky one, trying to reconcile when it creates kind of that shared collective experience of what RuneScape is versus it being an obstacle to new players coming in, and how we reconcile those two conflicts of the engaged user and the new user. So from a user experience standpoint, I'd prefer it if we removed it, but my player side also acknowledges the value of being in that shared experience. So yeah, I guess I'm conflicted. So that this is a case where we let the data to tell us the right thing to do.
I see a lot of players who are definitely in camp burn the shrimp, which is quite nice. I mean, I think it is, like you said, it's an iconic thing. Yeah, they're passionate about it. It's an iconic thing, so it makes sense to me.
Yeah, I mean, part of the learning there, as I mentioned last time, is also that it's teaching you that your skills will improve. That you might start off really sucking now, and that's kind of your call to action. You start off failing, but if you keep practicing these skills, you'll get better and you'll burn things less. So it kind of emphasizes the rags to riches journey of being a RuneScape player. So it has its advantages too, but certainly new people coming in, we find that they get frustrated by it to the extent that it may not be worth committing to that shared experience.
Understandable, I think.
Yeah.
Want to move on?
Yeah, sure. So I was quite surprised that this wasn't emphasized more. So in the new version, I put in a pop-up here about your minimap to emphasize movement through it. I think on old school they've, well, at least at some stage, we put holes through these gates so that you just took a shortcut. You didn't take that circuitous route. The intention originally was this is to try and get you to use your minimap and to realize, well, I can click on destination through that, and they will find their way there without any further interaction on my part. So I did fill those holes back in with the newer version because I felt like that was an important thing to cover, even if it means that it's going to take you a few steps longer to reach your destination. In this case, it's a way to portray that mechanic. And then the chef goes on to discussing your music player on the older version. That didn't really feel like that fitted with that character, and part of that thing I mentioned, that at the time the tutorial taught you everything that was in the game. It was very comprehensive. If there was a stone button there for a feature, then it got taught in Tutorial Island when it was first created. The music player isn't something that's really essential for you to be playing. It's something that we can save till later to encounter. So we have to skip over that and focus on the essentials and keep that flow from cooking on a fire to cooking on a range.
I'm glad we're no longer teaching everyone everything and only gone for the essentials. Otherwise, I think it would be probably like a 3 or 4 day tutorial to explain all the mechanics and all the things that you can find in RuneScape. Yeah,
that's the problem, man. We just keep adding more things to the game, so there'd be more and more things that you would have to learn about before you actually get to start playing it. As I said, I think that Tutorial Island, although it did perform better than Ashdale, I think it does still teach some things that aren't really crucial, and I think we are losing players in the process of that journey that could potentially have been retained if it was ended sooner. But we also have to ensure that we have effective onboarding to those things when you arrive. Something that's quite interesting is that we find people tend to do their first gameplay session on Tutorial Island. So it being about 20 minutes. If you see someone do a new player playthrough video on YouTube, their first episode, they're going to do Tutorial Island, then they go away, take a break, and then they'll come back for the next one. We find that there's a significant drop in engagement just after Tutorial Island. Basically, people have had that first gameplay experience. You go off and you carry on with the rest of your life, and you kind of forget to come back and play RuneScape again. So having that transition from one area to another can also in itself be a form of friction. So that's something we have to be mindful of. That if we're not giving them something clear to keep them going on, then they may not come back. Yes, so this one's basically equivalent to both of them. Not even sure why I kept that one in there, just for comparison's sake, I guess. One refers to the range directly, one is a little bit tighter in dialogue. That's about the only difference. I included filling your bucket from the sinks. You started with an empty bucket, while the older version gives you a full bucket. I gave you an empty bucket, and you have to fill it. Just a bit of extra world interaction to make you aware that the sinks are a thing. This is how you get water, and also because you've had quite a lot of conversation at this point, so it's just a little bit more variety of interaction. Also, something that I added into the new version was that each of these sections you can skip past them, in addition to the skip tutorial button that's on the menu. If you don't want to do the survival expert part, well, you can just go to the gate and you just skip that section. You can go onto the chef, and you can go through each step. So if you're already familiar with it, and you just want to refresh on a certain feature, then that option is available to you to skip certain sections.
That's really nice. I actually like that, Stu.
Thanks. So in the old version, we didn't have any kind of MakeX interface, so it was just very simple. You interact with the thing, and your stuff gets cooked. With the newer game, we have this MakeX interface, which displays all the things that you can cook on that range. Some of the how do I phrase this one? So when we were doing the first-time user experience in Berthorpe, we emphasized a lot ensuring that there was highlighting of the things that you needed to interact with to progress, to try and keep that flow simple, keep the engagement high. I was asked to minimize changes to Tutorial Island and focus on that one project. So consequently, although we could flash that cook button down there, I specifically excluded it in order to meet that aim of keeping Tutorial Island as similar as possible. Though I think there are still a lot of things that we could improve and fine-tune about it, given the opportunity. Something that was also done for the archaeology tutorial was to use variants of this MakeX interface that only shows the items that are available to you at the moment. So in this example, it would only have the bread. In order to try and reduce cognitive load. That's an aspect that has its pros and cons. On the one hand, you can see the things that you can achieve as your levels increase, but it's also more things on the screen, more things that can confuse you.
Cool. Can I chuck in a couple of questions again?
Please.
This is something you've worked on, so I thought I'll ask it. We've moved the Combat Academy. It's no longer in Lumbridge.
Mm-hmm.
Where can players go now to learn more about the EOC combat?
Yeah, that is a tricky one. So when I was doing the Fatui, my hope was that the Combat Academy would still be around. So tutorial goes into a lot of detail about explaining the core combat mechanics during the Fatui, but it isn't currently playable outside of that, because I was expecting the Combat Academy to fill that space. As it turns out, trying to convert the Combat Academy to the most recent features and to reconcile limitations in the mobile interface, given that it was teaching you things like hovering over things and getting tooltip information, or getting targeting information that just fundamentally isn't shown on that platform. It's a issue that we have to deal with a lot with the legacy interface as well, that there are features that older interface just doesn't have, and then how you manage teaching those things. It basically Modserver did actually an incredible amount of work on the Combat Academy, trying to update it, like weeks and weeks refining it, trying to fit into our current situation. But in the end, it didn't prove to be practical. So unfortunately, had to remove that. So what I would like to do long term is make the tutorials that tutorial covers available in a replayable fashion. So that would, I hope, fill that space where those new updated things are available to you outside of the tutorial flow. But for the moment, I'm afraid there isn't an alternative.
Cool, thank you. You mentioned Fatui, and that stands for what?
Oh, sorry. Yes, we use a lot of internal jargon. So that stands for first-time user experience. It's more or less synonymous with new player experience, or what you might call tutorial. Basically, also the funnel. So you think of the funnel as being essentially at the top of the funnel, people come into the game, and you try to retain as many of them as possible because gradually the funnel is going to narrow, and you're going to have less players. So it's a matter of just trying to keep that funnel as wide as possible. Is the goal
yeah. No, it's the bit of the onboarding as well and all that stuff, right?
yeah. There's a lot of overlapping terms for a quite similar thing.
Xemzes X, I hope I pronounced your name correctly, also mentioned about that his phone is freezing as well. Similarly, we also found out since yesterday that there is an Android crash, which we'll also try to address. Then moving on, this is another interesting one that I'm curious what your opinion is on this, Stu. Slick NA says that it seems like the social interactions have been removed from the first-time user experience of the game. And this person is of the opinion that the first-time user experience or the community is also a big part of that first-time user experience. How do you see that? Because you mentioned a bit about cognitive load there as well earlier on.
Yeah, Brother Brace does still include some chat elements, but he doesn't go into as much detail. He doesn't cover your friends and ignore list. So that's something that I think ideally it basically needs its own onboarding space that we just haven't implemented yet. Because so many more social features have been added since then. You also got to consider clans and onboarding for that. All these different chat channels. You got friends chat and clan chat and making groups. This gives kind of a whole social space to consider there separately. So it's basically something that we're mindful of, but we'd prefer to address in a way, I guess, more like that Combat Academy principle of something that is replayable within the world at a point that is more relevant to you. Because someone coming in right at the very start here, they may not have any friends yet. They may be playing it for the first time, needing to ignore players or add them to their friends list may not be relevant to them at this stage. So we want to provide that. It's just a matter of defining where and when. But yes, I certainly agree that the social aspect is important.
Cool. For me, there's also, in the social element, there's also just like kind of seeing other players. At least to me, that's always quite important in a game. And I believe we currently purposely hide them on Tutorial Island, don't we?
Yeah, that's right. So that has its pros and cons. As I said, it helps to reduce the cognitive load, but it also makes that starting experience feel a little bit empty. We're hoping that we can get the sweet spot of that by minimizing that time that you're on Tutorial Island. So in a pipe dream scenario, what I would prefer would be if we had a primer, which was only like it took less than 5 minutes, that just covered the basic controls, the core concept of skilling and interacting with something in the world in a very abstract, generic sense, just to give you the essentials to survive. Because we do find that having some kind of primer does have better retention than trying to teach everything in world when there's a lot of other distractions going on. And then having contextual tutorialization and paths and other means in world to try to teach these things that are more relevant to certain types of users. As you say, someone who is more into the social thing, having features that cover those things. But for the moment, Tutorial Island is what we have.
Okay, cool. There were all the questions again.
Okay,
so
great.
Feel free to continue.
Yes, I think we can skip past that one. Basically just comparing the two. We covered the music player here. Again, that's one that I opted to skip over and just to save that for later when it would be more relevant to the user. He also covers emotes, which also we don't cover. So again, this is something that would fit better within that social space that was intended for a future project. Running is something that happens by default now, and you have a lot more default run energy, so it basically isn't as much of a concern, so we opted to not specify that. Which then would entail go back into the options menu, and that's a scary place. Then we go onto quests again. I would much rather if we just taught the stuff in world, but had to maintain parity with Tutorial Island to meet the brief. But at least I endeavoured to use pop-ups here to try to put that information across in as concise a fashion as possible, rather than putting it in a text form. And also drawing attention to the iconography on the minimap here as well, just to try and make that connection be more likely to recognize that icon at a later stage. You're smirking, Luke. What's up there?
I mean, it's just people are slowly getting scared of cognitive load now. You've mentioned it so many times.
I did warn you. If you're going to have to start a drinking game or bingo or something.
Oh, yeah. you would not survive that. Similarly, at the same time, they're saying we can easily just solve the problem if we just give humans more cognitive load.
That would definitely be a big improvement. Yeah, we should do that.
Yes, and then they're talking. And the last thing that they're talking about right now is about we should drop them in the Lumbridge Church where they can get married, and then teach them about marriage in RuneScape, which I think is a very wholesome idea.
Yeah. I mean, if you're going along including it in the social aspect, that is pretty cool. Yeah. See if you get yourself a RuneScape girlfriend, get the whole 9 yards. Yeah. We'll look into that. So then we go underground. Going on to the mining smithing part, I just wanted to emphasize here that this is kind of giving you a lot of information that's not really necessary. You could just basically just have the objective to talk to him. You don't really need to be reassuring them not to panic. It's kind of just filling space. Again, the mining instructor, it makes it a bit more personable that he asks you for your name and things, but it does just mean there's a lot more steps the player needs to interact with, and we found that the more things that you have to do on the critical path, the less likely people are actually going to carry on. It's the whole space barring issue. So try to keep it to as few conversation pages as possible, minimize the information that you're putting across, just stick to the basics. Fortunately, we don't have prospecting anymore, so I was able to skip this whole section. And we have the new mining to take into account, but the basic interaction is pretty similar, and we don't have to worry about pickaxes, so we can just move on here. One drawback that I know that I would definitely like to fix is that our current activity tracker has issues with red-green color blindness. Definitely would like to standardize that to something that is more accessible, but it does give you a bit more feedback in other respects. And then, we move on to the furnace. We have to mention that you deposit your ores into the metal bank now. That's an extra complexity to take into account. And consequently, although we could just do that one interaction in the old version and you got your bars out, things have become a lot more complicated now with the new smithing system. So walking you through this interface where you deposit your items, you choose your bars, and then you progress, there is unfortunately a lot of information that puts on the screen. So the approach we took was to de-emphasize that by focusing your attention on the parts that you need to interact with right now. Try to hopefully establish a kind of a muscle memory where they're more likely to know what are the basic things they need to interact with the next time around. And then that gets reinforced and in an even briefer form subsequently. Comparing to the old school one, which is this the first time they've had a modal interface. So just try to keep it very, very simple, focus on that one thing you need to interact with, so it's unambiguous. Then moving on to Vanica.
Are you able to explain what a modal is quickly?
Oh yeah, sure. So basically it's slightly more complicated than this, but there's basically top-level interfaces which are connected to your heads-up display. There are overlay interfaces which they are displayed, but you can still move around and interact with the world while they're active. And then modal interfaces are interfaces which take your focus. If you were to interact with something in the world, it would close that interface. You might find that, for example, with things like, say, if you were to take damage and you had your bank open, that would close the bank because it's a modal interface.
Okay.
It's particularly necessary with things like dialogue because we need to be able to take your input from that dialogue, and there are like dialogue boxes where you, like a search field, where you need to or enter a certain quantity to take out of your coin pouch, things like that. Those things have to be modal because they need protected access to the player to get that them in context, so that we can then take that input.
Okay. I don't know who it said in chat, but someone said you're a model.
A model?
Yeah.
I'm a modal. Oh, right. Yeah. I'll be called worse. I'll take it. So yes, so he's quite boastful. He thinks you're just another newcomer. Some people take a bit of umbrage to this. They feel it's quite aggressive, but I kept it in anyway because some people are quite fond of that. We simplified this a little bit because our WARN interface is buried in the parent interfaces, and that's quite hard to get to. So just emphasized how do you actually equip the thing. At one stage, there was also a section where you used the cog on your action bar to automatically populate your action bar with abilities that, like taken from the wiki, that were optimized for your level. We simplified that at one stage, and that's now just an automated thing, so that you're not essentially crippled entering the game with nothing on your action bar. Set a lot of presets so that if you were to skip this tutorial, you can still engage with basic combat. Someone told me that him referring to it as a butter knife was very, very important, so I included that. I think I think it was on the earlier page when I edited things down a little bit. Also, yeah, there's a little bit of an odd reinforcement here in the older version, where you've gone to all this trouble of making your own item, and then he immediately says it's worthless and gives you something else, which, from one aspect, that kind of shows a degree of progression. It also severely downgrades the effort you've put in and can be a bit off-putting. So opted to just stick with the dagger for this interaction, because we're going to have opportunities later on to start making more upgraded equipment on the path. Something also that's on the old version is the combat interface, which we get a lot of requests to bring that back, and I think we're looking into aspects of that.
Everything we're showing right now is of the current tutorial, right? Or is this also some of these things that you're working on and we'll see in a future tutorial release?
So this one I've shown here is our current tutorial island. So it does include a couple of little tweaks in here and there that have been added over time, but yeah, this is the current state of it.
Cool.
So I'm going to say that word again, but cognitive load. The player, that you've got the thrill of the fight and all this action going on, and you're seeing your hit splats, but having this pop up down there saying, explaining all that stuff to you, kind of draws your attention away from the fight. So I opted to just give the player an opportunity to just enjoy that moment in combat and be focused on that without any additional distractions. Aspects like hit point bars are fairly intuitive at this stage. I think we can, to some degree, expect that the player probably has some familiarity with aspects like that. They become pretty universal now. And you made your first kill. The old version went on and also covered ranged here. We at the time had Combat Academy, and we at the time that I implemented also, we were taking you on to Lumbridge, so I used to refer to the Blood Pact quest and the Combat Academy. I believe it refers it now to Berthorpe in the next stage. Because basically here we just want to, here's the core loop of how you actually kill something, and we can build on that at a later stage rather than having to cover it all at once. Yeah, there we go. So it covers that on the mainland.
Just to clarify a bit, Ericsson or Erikun RS asked when will this be released. So currently we're just talking about the existing tutorial and about past tutorials, so this is nothing that is not released. but we're just analyzing and looking over the tutorial, what goes into a tutorial, and the thoughts of what Stu around the various bits and bobs of the tutorial. That was it. Keep going.
Yeah, very well described, Luke. Thank you. I think I've gone into even more detail than last time here because we're up to, I believe, 5 minutes till the end of the stage, and I think I'm only like halfway. But oh well.
I've had the producer say in my earpiece that we can go to a half past, so that's fine.
Okay, cool. Well, I'll try to hustle it along. Okay, so I'll try to hustle it along a little bit, but also I think having answered some questions along the way hopefully means that there won't be too much at the end.
Exactly.
Okay, I think we can skip that. So then we're going to move on to banking. So I moved in the old version, the banker is in a side room, and you do your banking first. I opted to put the banker first and cover the notions of banking in dialogue rather than putting a lot of things in pop-ups, which aren't so good if you need to convey a large volume of text. So we have the conversation happening at the start here, and basically took the various things that the financial advisor covers and tried to do them in a fashion that's more succinct. Some of these things are conditional. So, for example, him mentioning the Grand Exchange, he skips over that for Iron Men because they wouldn't be able to access the Grand Exchange anyway. It'd be unnecessary information to an Iron Man. That's pretty similar.
Quick question from Hal's answer as well right now. So if you create an alt account, you'll send it with 3 options, which is like, I've very recently played RuneScape. I still somewhat recall RuneScape, and I've never played. If you select the option I've very recently played, you will skip the tutorial. So yes, there is. Keep going.
Yes. So that's there primarily for our analytics team to know how users self-select, and then also it has some impact on whether you skip tutorial or not. Sometimes we also do A/B tests of different results from the player's choice there. That's why it is quite abstract. I have previously tried to put in clearer instructions of what the consequences of those actions are, but from an analytics perspective, they prefer just to get the player's answer to that question and not be led by the consequences of that action.
Cool. It's giving a little bit of a secret away there, I think.
Yeah,
that's not something that a lot of people know, but I like it though. I think it's cool though.
Yeah, I'm maybe not particularly good at keeping secrets. So if you don't hear from me after this one, if this is the end of the series, well, now you know why. Okay, moving on.
I'm sure it won't be the last one.
So then covering prayers, the Brother Brace does that through a series of chat boxes. I've done it through pop-ups that are focused on particular parts of the screen, emphasizing your prayer list separately from your prayer points. And so you, in the process, also learn what those aspects of the interface mean. And then as we mentioned earlier, he does cover the friends and ignore list, which we opted to save until later when that becomes an option for us to develop. But certainly I like that idea of basing it around a marriage. That's a very cool idea. See if we can propose that to the necessary people. And yeah, just being courteous and nice to each other, emphasizing that. I thought it was important to keep that in, even if it is a bit of extra text to read through. It's wholesome. Consequently, because we don't... Ooh, have I frozen?
No, you're still here.
Okay, all right, cool. Because we don't cover magic here, this part is kind of redundant. If I was allowed a bit more liberty, I probably would have just cut this section entirely. But he briefly covers the spell book and the kind of the broader principle of magic, because we're going to cover the actual embedded combat tutorialization later on. So consequently, skip over the killing a chicken with Windstrike. We do mention runecrafting. And because we have the lodestone network now, I'm trying to onboard that, because if the player happens to go and organically wander around the world, it's helpful to know some way that they can get back to a safe hub. So covering that up front, while it's just simply a transition in the older version. This was quite an old video that I used this from. That's why it doesn't include the home teleport spell in there. Both of them also just make you aware of where you're going to, just to give you a bit of context. And then it's, in the usual fashion, a guided series of pop-ups of the explicit thing you need to interact with in order to progress. And then we get to our final destination. Now, as you can see, that default interface is quite condensed. We have to restrict our default interface to our minimum supported screen resolution, which is why those things are of a particular size. And unfortunately, that means that if you have a wider resolution than that, things essentially just get pulled into the corners and there's gaps in between. That does restrict us in a few different ways. It would be nice if we supported a higher resolution, but that is where we are. But we at least tried to make the default interface as similar to the new one as we could within those constraints, at least like the minimap in the top right and the ribbon down the bottom right and so on. But yeah, that's certainly something I would like to improve on further. And that's basically it. Yeah, if we move on to the next one, I think is just... Oh yes, one more thing. So just a little oddity to throw in here. This is what we call a heat map. So this is... I can't recall exactly when it was taken. It was something that I found in the file share, but I thought it was quite interesting. So this is basically showing the density of player presence on a map over a longer period of time. So not too surprisingly, basically you see more players stick around in the first room, trying to get to grips with the controls. They're probably going to be a bit more resilient at that stage, willing to actually read through each page of the dialogue. And as you progress, basically people are spending less and less time, and those ones, the ones that are there, the ones that have got to grips with the core mechanics, they may be at a point where they just want to move on a lot faster. They're probably skipping the dialogue a lot more frequently because it is quite a long experience.
I think that kind of shows that the further players just get in general, they start to understand the mechanics more and more, and they're able to progress faster throughout it, though, isn't it?
Yeah, that too.
Some people are making references to Corona now, and there's places where you shouldn't be on Tutorial Island.
Well, at least it's instant. So it's the best kind of social distancing is a island all to yourself.
Yes, that's definitely true. I'm glad you put this pun on there as well, Mods 2. We've reached our Stu and A, and I'm gonna go back to where you talked about 2 slides back straight away. Okay, and great. That Demon Kill 22 asked a question, and he said, "I really like the UI of the game as a whole. Maybe thinks there could be improvements made to like how the interfaces look, or how we approach it. Whether we could teach them that. What are your thoughts on that?"
Yeah, I definitely agree that our interface needs a lot of work. Again, I kind of specialize in the tutorial area. There's other people who are much better with systems and interfaces who are definitely very mindful of that. And people have done like different flows for how to lay these things out, doing different UI styles. A tricky part, unfortunately, when it comes to getting you into the world is that once you've actually landed in the mainland, people want to be able to access all these different features. So the tricky part comes is managing players who are already familiar with the game, that they're doing like an alt or an Iron Man, and they want access to all of those advanced user features right out of the gate, versus someone who's new. And ideally, we would hide a lot more of those features earlier on and unlock them more gradually as you progress. But someone who's already familiar with the game wouldn't want to go through that tutorialization. They wouldn't want essentially the training wheels to be on. So our current user interface gives you an awful lot of power, but with that power comes a great deal of responsibility, and it's not really optimal for a new user. So yes, we definitely want to improve on that area.
Yes, cool. I think that's a very rounded answer there. It covers all the bases. If there are any questions in chat, please put them. If you've got any questions for Stu, or you want his opinion on a certain part of the tutorial, please put it down in chat. I've got a couple of others as well. We've got the Stronghold of Security. Do you think that should have a place within the tutorial or the onboarding somewhere?
Okay. I think that it would have to be updated quite significantly in order to be relevant. I mean, it does. I guess the ideal would be to use that as the basis for something that more emphasizes the social features and ensuring that your account security is well managed. So I think putting that essentially within our first 5 minutes to 20 minutes experience, I think would be a little too overwhelming. But I think that as essentially a hub for player security and social features as a more concentrated update, I think would be a valuable thing. But I think if someone new coming into our current one, I think would really struggle. A lot of the ways in which you can actually progress through it is quite obfuscated. It's not really all that modernized in terms of how you progress through it. I mean, there's an anecdotal concept that the cockroaches are a good thing to be training on as a new user. That's actually quite an outdated concept nowadays. There are a lot of other alternatives that are available, which has kind of made it less relevant. So yeah, I think I'd like to do more of it, but I think if that was the case, it would probably involve quite a lot of reworking it too in order to maximize its potential.
Cool. Thank you for that. I know some other people mentioned as well, it was briefly discussed in the chat, but I was not able to catch your name, sadly. What are your thoughts on the tool belt? Because it makes certain elements of playing the game a lot easier, but you will still require to put things on your tool belt and all those things later on. That's not really explained. What's your thought on that tool belt in general?
Well, we do have a bit of tutorialization of the tool belt during the path that does cover that for mining, I believe. But yeah, I think that's something that it would be a good example of where we would use contextual tutorialization. So effectively, the first time that you acquire an item that can be tool belted, then triggering a contextual pop-up there that then at that point, when it is relevant to you, the concept of, hey, this thing can be added to your tool belt. Here's what that means. Here's how you do it. I think would be the way I'd go about that. It isn't currently implemented, but if the opportunity arose, yeah, that's how I would do it. In terms of how I generally feel about the tool belt, I think it's a very useful quality of life feature, and certainly it gives us some really nice reward spaces as new items that you can find and add. It creates some good objectives in the long term, and also just that convenience of previously you had to carry around certain items, and if you didn't have them with you, then you couldn't engage with certain skills. It was quite restrictive. So I think this allows more flexibility.
Cool. I've been told that we really shouldn't end our stream right live now because our producer is away, and he specifically asked us not to do it. So we won't. So we're fine.
Well, hey, 14-hour live stream it is.
Yeah, it could be indeed 14 hours. He's already back again, so we can't talk bad about him anymore. Another question, which was from Rat Camel. There currently isn't really a place for new players to ask questions, like a friends chat or something. What are your thoughts on creating something? Are there any risks to doing something like that, for example?
Yeah, I think falling under that banner of tutorialization for social features in particular, that's something that has been recommended as well. Essentially, some kind of world chat that when someone enters as a new user, if we automatically subscribe them to that friends chat, it would require some degree of moderation, I'd imagine, to ensure that the people there who are getting the best access to this feature, and the people who actually want to give them helpful feedback are engaging with it. So yeah, it's certainly something that you probably have yourself heard from people in community management have suggested as a feature that we should add. And so yeah, I think that if we had a project that was emphasizing developing our social tutorialization, I think that would be a very good place to do that.
Hmm. This is a slightly broader question. The next one, but because it's a Stu and I will allow it. Lord Doctor One asks you, "What's your fondest memory of a project you've worked on?"
Honestly, I've worked on so many good, fun projects.
I know you have.
I know. I think the Death of Chivalry still definitely has the strongest place in my heart. I'm really pleased with how that one turned out. The Brink of Extinction, also very high up there, just because I was pleased with how I managed to create a Grandmaster quest on a very, very limited budget. Used a lot of tricks to try and make it seem like a bigger quest than it actually was. Also had full voice acting to that at the last minute, so trying to turn that around rapidly was an interesting challenge. Yeah, I think that basically the quests, I think, are the things I'm most proud of.
Okay, I think to be fair, I think a lot of people actually know you for quests and those kinds of things as well. So that kind of makes sense. Someone in chat asks, "Are you the oldest Jagex employee right now?"
Fortunately not, no. There's several ahead of me, Mod Ash, Mod Ian, a few other ones that I can't immediately think of. Good old Og, of course. Nah, I've only been here since 2006. I'm relatively young in terms of Jagex years.
I mean, you're almost reaching the 15-minute, 15-year mark, though. Which
Yeah, 15 year anniversary this year. Yeah.
That is something we tend to celebrate in quite a lot of detail with our staff, because it's definitely an achievement. Another question from Lazy _ what are your thoughts on how we sometimes feedback messages? Like, if you've turned off game messages, you will not see a lot of information that can be useful. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree that's a real issue. A lot of feedback messages in the game were just done as chat messages, and basically anywhere we spot them during a project or whenever I'm looking at any code, I convert them over to what we call info boxes. These ones that are these floaters that appear on your screen and then fade away, and that's independent of your chat box. Basic approach is that unless it's incidental information the player doesn't require, if it's anything that's actually feedback, a response to your actions, then we put it in an info box. So particularly on mobile, that's a more of a necessary thing. So basically, we're going through and converting those over gradually. It's just a case of there are thousands and thousands of them. So we have to just do it over a longer period of time. But yeah, ultimately, we do need to convert all of those. It's just a matter of continuing to chip away at it.
Cool. Thank you very much. I think those were the questions that I wrote down. So I'll give everyone in chat a brief moment to write down their question in chats as well if they have one. At the same time, we're going to combine stuff because I know our producer at some point wants to wander off as well. So I'll do the outro promotion for Twitch Prime right now. So get the button ready. There you go. It's on screen already. 14 days of free membership. So make sure you claim that with your Twitch Prime. And at the same time, make sure you use your Twitch Prime sub on one of the amazing content creators that the RuneScape 3 community have, or any other content creator, of course. Don't use it on us. We're fine. That's that. There you go. Let me go double check if there were any other questions that were quite interesting to ask. This is I'm going to ask it, but I think it's an interesting one. If you don't fancy answering it, that's fine too. Have you ever thought about introducing like Treasure Hunter to Tutorial Island?
Again, conflating Tutorial Island specifically with onboarding in general. So that's an example of one where we do have a contextual pop-up. We've got actually quite a few of them built into the game at certain points. In this example, when you first get keys, then you're made aware of that feature, and then pop-ups exist. I mean, there are lots of those actually all over the game. Mod Hunter created a ton of them when he first did the path system, and most of those are still present and active.
Cool.
But yeah, I don't think it needs any more than that, because it's it's like its own kind of separate mini game. If we're not going to cover, as you say, crafting or dungeoneering, then that's certainly equally secondary.
Okay. I mean, I think that kind of explains as well on that question. I see a lot of people responding to the question chat as well, which is quite interesting. But I think we're going to leave it at that. Thank you very much, Stu. Oh, one question before we go. Where are we going to talk about next week?
So I appreciate knowing your feedback on this. Did you enjoy this sort of structure? Would you like something similar on the next one? Would you like me to change things up? If I was to continue on this format, then I would do a similar thing for learning the ropes. I'll be honest, I know less about that one. So it would be a case of I basically would take a video of it and just walk through it from my personal experience of when I played it once and my current response to it. I wouldn't really have as much in the way of developer stories to offer you. So consider that in your decision making. So the flow from here would be learning the ropes, then unstable foundations and the advisor system, progressing into the Lumbridge introductory tasks, and then idea would be to continue with the whole series. But let me know what you think. Would you like that to be the next one? Would you like me to do something else?
Learning the ropes is one of the early game quests, right?
Learning the ropes, it was basically tutorial 2. It was the replacement for Tutorial Island. Although it was actually framed in the form of a quest, it was actually the only tutorial that's been put in the quest list. That's actually why you start with one quest point, is because quest points are like this resource that once we give them, we can't take them away again. So everyone starts with one quest point because learning the ropes was a thing, even though that tutorial has since been replaced.
Oh, that's a nice, fun fact for you there. Cool. All right. Thank you all for watching. Thank you for your time as well. Thank you for making the PowerPoint for this as well. I'm not going to comment about when you did it because we both know shouldn't happen. And then we're going to see you all next week. Any closing words from you?
No, just other than thank you very much for staying to the end. I admire and appreciate your endurance, and I hope you enjoyed it. And I look forward to seeing you next time, assuming I'm not fired.
There you go. Look after yourselves, everyone. Bye-bye.